Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's presentation, Being with Bears, Learning the Bear Necessities. My name is Kyle Pinuve. I am the Conservation Easement Program Manager for Sonoma Land Trust and am going to be your host this evening. Sonoma Land Trust's mission is to protect the natural lands of Sonoma County for everyone to benefit. The organization was founded in 1976 and has since protected over 50,000 acres. These protected lands contribute to the necessary contiguous, connected natural landscapes, also known as wildlife corridors, that so many wildlife species rely on. Tonight, our conversation is about bears, but the conservation of these lands for wildlife is only one of the many benefits our work through your support can achieve. Now, before I introduce our guest speaker, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items to make sure that everyone gets the most out of tonight's presentation. We are using Zoom's webinar platform, which is more secure and safer for panelists and you, the attendees, but unfortunately, this means that we are unable to take live on camera questions. We will be reserving the last 15 minutes of tonight's presentation for question and answers, but you can submit your Q&A at any point during the presentation. There's a little button in the bottom center of your screen that says Q&A. Just type in your question and we'll do our best to get to it at the end of Meghan's presentation. There will be a lot of questions and we're really going to do our best to get through them all. The webinar is scheduled for 90 minutes, which will include the Q&A at the end and is going to be recorded and hosted on the Sonoma Land Trust's social media accounts within the next few days. And tonight's webinar is special because we're going to end it with a video that was produced in-house by Sonoma Land Trust about bears in Sonoma County. So please stick around for that. It's just a short 4-minute video. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Meghan Walla-Murphy. Meghan currently runs the North Bay Bear Collaborative and works within our community as an educator, author, expert wildlife tracker, all-around conservationist, and we're so thankful and grateful to have Meghan sharing her expertise with us today. So with that, I will hand it over to Meghan.
Well, hello, everybody. Nice to see you on this just so interesting kind of medium for talks and platforms. And I really appreciate you coming together in this way. Welcome to my office. I usually don't have 146 people in my office, so welcome. How nice to have you here. Just as a way to kind of get an idea of who you are and where you might be from, if you could just, and that's a great way to practice how to use the question and answer box. If you could just go in there and maybe chat where you're from, because it's been incredible. I've done several of these webinars and I'm always astounded by the breadth of where people are watching from. And with that said, most of my talk is going to be focused on bears in California and specifically Sonoma County, but it is pretty broad ranging. So welcome, thank you, and I hope you are all finding yourselves healthy and peaceful in this strange time, and I'll try and interweave the reality of COVID and bears and certainly the civil unrest that's going on because it all feels very pertinent to me. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and thank you, Kyle and Sonoma Land Trust, for having me out here. I appreciate it. All right, and I'm just gonna make sure, Kyle, can you see that it's all shared? Okay, great. Well, welcome. I always like to start with this slide because it kind of gives a little bit of understanding of where I come from and my background with bears and how much I dearly, dearly love bears. This is a picture that was taken, I took it in Yellowstone. Part of my work, I've worked in Yellowstone with Dr. James Halfpenny. He's a carnivore biologist. He was working on the project to reintroduce wolves, but I've also gotten to be out there working with him with bears. An amazing man, he teaches classes. Please go find him if you can. But anyway, we were out and it was early morning, maybe like 4:35 in the morning, and we got to see this mama bear with her cubs, and she was right along the side of the road. And the cubs were rolling around and playing, and then all of a sudden she just put her arms out and sat down, and the cubs crawled up and started nursing from her. And I was blown away because literally I was in the car and she couldn't have been more than 10, 15 feet away from me. And I've seen that behavior a lot with wildlife. I work with lots of different wildlife. And when they're in vulnerable positions, they'll often use human structures and cars and roadsides to deter other people and other animals that might be predators. And in this case, it could be just a larger bear coming up and chasing her off and killing her cubs. So we got to be there, and we're sitting and I'm watching him nurse, and I'm like, oh, this is so beautiful. But as I've heard, I don't have my own kids from my friends who do, that, children nursing can get restless, and these two little cubs did, and they kind of started, you could hear them like kind of growling, and one of them was like pushing on the other, and the mom made some like huffing noises, and I was like, huh. But they must have still continued to irritate her, and one must have nipped her, and then she just stood up, and the bear cubs rolled down the hill, and I was like, oh, bears have boundaries, and they probably also have really good parenting techniques. So it just really opened up bears to me and their relationship, and we're going to just keep going a little bit deeper into this story. The first time I was really fascinated by bears beyond the usual interest was when I was in the Berkshires in Western Massachusetts, and this was maybe about 15 years ago, and I was invited by a couple who said, oh, Meghan, we have to take you to this step-by-step trail, or sometimes they're called ancestral trails or traditional trails. And we got to this area in the Berkshires, and there, at least 6 to 7 inches into the ground, were these footsteps that were pushed deeply into the ground. I've since found them in Colorado, in California, and Arizona. And what fascinated me about these was that it was so regular, and you could see that there were many years of growth and depth of the duff that was going on. And I've since researched about these step-by-step trails, and I've found videos, and you'll see little bears will actually extend their footprints or their stride to make sure their footprints are landing right in the same tracks of these other bears, and big bears will shorten their stride to make sure that they're stepping into these tracks as well. And then they sometimes will pop their joints and elbows, or even twist their paws to make sure they're really getting deep into it. I've been told that some of these can be up in Alaska, which I have never been to or seen, but maybe Kyle can confirm or not confirm, because he's worked with bears in Alaska, is that they're up to 1.5 feet deep. And subsequently, I've also been told that these bear trails, these ancestral bear trails, are shared from generation to generation. The mothers teach their cubs about these trails. So there I was in the Berkshires seeing the first one. It was about 15 years ago, like I said. And what was really fascinating about this trail is if you had point A up here where my hand is and point B, the easiest path to get from A to B would have been a straight line. But these bears moved and walked very circuitously around. It was not the easiest way to go. And at every place where there was a curve or a turn in the path, they had slashed the trees. I didn't have a camera with me, so these are different bear marked trees. But it was fascinating, and I started to realize this is deep communication, and there's a mystery. And I have looked to see why it happens, but nobody has really given a good explanation, and I haven't found any good writing about it. There's lots of theories of oh, maybe it's a seasonal food trail, but when the food blows out, they'll still use those trails. Some have said it's for reproduction. But the reality is we don't know. But what I felt and what I knew is that there's such incredible communication going on with bears, well beyond what we can maybe even imagine. And I was just honored to be able to be in the presence of that and continue to find these trails. So here we go, into the bear world and looking at all of the different ways that they communicate. And I'm excited that you're on this journey. So we're mainly going to be talking about black bears. I'll do a short little piece about grizzlies, So most of these photos, with the exception, if you can see my cursor, of this top left photo, are black bears, and the top left is grizzly bears. And we'll kind of start with grizzlies. Here is a map of the historical grizzly distribution in what we now call the United States. And if the map was larger, the grizzlies actually did go down into southern and central Mexico. And California had what is believed to be one of the largest varieties of the grizzly bear, which is also called a brown bear. And sadly, the only place we really see the California grizzly now is on our state flag. But grizzlies were hunted mercilessly. We had some of the largest, as I said, and it was because there's an incredible abundance of food. And we also had these amazing marine mammals going up and down the California coastline. And so there were the seal rookeries, but also whale carcasses would come up, and that's just an abundance of fat. And so today, as I said, this is where we see our California grizzly. The last one was shot in about, numbers vary anywhere from 1919 to 1923 in Southern California. So here is kind of our updated California Department of Fish. This is an older map of Fish and Wildlife. And this is the current black bear range. And you can see where we are in Sonoma County. We're right in black bear range. And people are really interested to hear it because often I'm told, well, I didn't know there were black bears in Sonoma County. And in some places that might be true, that they weren't there, but they're coming now. Because if you imagine most of Sonoma County, with the exception of the northwest corner, Annapolis, Walla, the heavily, Stewart's Point, the heavily forested areas, historically that's where they say our only black bears were. And the rest of our county was predominantly grizzly county. We had the chaparral, the oak woodlands, and massive grasslands, which is great grizzly habitat. And then when they were extirpated, there weren't bears on the landscape for a long time. But what we're finding in California is black bear numbers are continuing to rise. California, has not done a new estimate since 2016, but you can see in 2016 we had about 45,000 bears, and the number continues to rise. So what we believe is happening in Sonoma County is that the bears are dispersing from Humboldt County and Mendocino counties, which are both north of us. And both those counties have some of the highest densities of black bears in California. So the bears are kind of filling in a void and a vacuum that was created by grizzly extirpation. We believe. We don't know for sure, but that's kind of our working hypothesis right now. I moved here in 2012, and in 2013, just, I don't know, not even half a mile from my house, there was a bear walking through, and it was a young juvenile dispersing. And this bear, right, it's all the same bear actually. And this bear came to one of the residents that was here, and they have multiple houses on it, and there was like gallons of fish emulsion. And this bear went right into it and just started to drink the fish emulsion. And the response to this was a dear friend of mine, Jim Coleman, who is a grassland specialist, and I'll let you take a minute to read this quote. But the thing that I really appreciated most about this quote that Jim had sent out to us was reminding us that our fridges and freezers and gardens are part of a larger ecosystem. I think we can forget, we're in our homes, we're like, this is our home, we're a little bit safe and separate, but the bears are not looking at us as separate from nature at all. We, in their world, are just part of this natural ecosystem that they live in, and we have a lot of food, people like to eat just like bears do. And the other thing was, we're humbly made to understand a little bit more about our relationship with bears and the bigger forces of nature. So bears do really ask us to be humble and aware of, like I said, our boundaries and where is our ship a little loose, or where are we leaking trash and things like that. The bears are great indicators of our own behavior and reflect back to us. So bear sightings kind of started to become the norm. There's lots of sightings in 2014 and 2015. And if you're local, you may have seen the most recent articles. The bears were seen over in Sonoma Mountain. Last year, I tracked one, walking down in downtown Santa Rosa, and it kind of hooked a right on the Santa Rosa Creek Trail and headed out into West County. So bears are becoming the norm in Sonoma County. And there's lots of questions around that, which I'll be excited to answer later. Again, I'm not going to read this slide, but here's kind of just brief descriptions of what black bears look like. And I want to say, you know, we're using these words like black bears and brown bears. A black bear is Ursus americanus, that's its genus and species, but a black bear can be brown. Just to kind of clarify that mystery there. Typically, they might have a light tan muzzle and the rest of their body is black. They have larger ears than grizzly bears, and they don't have the hump that grizzly bears have. So we're going to just dive in a little bit to their track and sign and what you might find when you're out there. So here, I don't have a really great picture of the bottom of black bear feet. So these are the grizzly feet that I have from working in Yellowstone. But what I'd love for all of you to do in the audience right now is just become really aware of your feet and your toes. You can wiggle your toes around. And now, you know, it helps me if I close my eyes. So now just wiggle your big toe. And now imagine putting your big toe to the outside of your foot where your pinky toe is. That's where a bear's big toe is. Their smallest toe is on the inside, their biggest toe is on their outside. So it's flipped from us, and oftentimes people will mistake side of body when they're tracking because they're thinking their big toes are just like our big toes. Grizzly bears have longer claws than our black bears because they're diggers and they were adapted to run really quickly and move across big open spaces and dig for their food. And that's not to say that black bears don't dig for their food, but they tend to be tree climbers and they have these very short, sharp claws. But you can see the Blackfoot can look very much like a human foot. It's a little bit broader. And then the front foot, again, you have these 5 toes and you get this kind of kidney-shaped pad. And then sometimes you'll see a little circle of the front foot coming up. And when you're out tracking, which I love to do, sometimes bears, even being these large, charismatic megafauna, leave very subtle trails. And you're like, what? How did this bear move through here and not leave a track? And so here's an example of something you might see. I mean, look at that's really juicy, wet mud. And you're like, yes. But right here is that kidney shape that I was talking about. And you can just see the little dimples of toes. And again, here's a kidney shape. And these are actually claws right here. So tracks, even though for big animals, can be very subtle because their foot is so flat. Again, here you can see the kidney shape. The toes are really, you know, kind of hidden. There might be a little claw right here. And a lot of that has to do with the flatness of their foot. They are plantigrade animals, meaning that they place their whole entire foot down on the ground. It's really interesting. I spent a lot of time in Southern Africa also working and tracking, and similarly, elephants leave very subtle sign. You're like, really? You're like the largest land mammal and I can't find your track. But there are days when you get out there and you get the most beautiful track and sign and you're like, oh, thank you, universe, for whatever. And these are the days that you're like, yes, I'm on the trail and it's fresh. And you can see the large toe here, all 5 toes, the big kidney shape. The tricky thing about bears is their trails will look like human trails when they're walking through vegetation because one, like we saw, their feet are very similarly shaped to humans, but also the way that their footing is spaced, they tromp down in this flat mark. So this is my friend Lisa, and she's pointing at these kind of subtle tracks that are very foot and shoe shaped. So this is the right side of the body, the left side of the body. This was another track in the grass, and I like this track because I'm a geek and I track a lot of scat, but this is a front left foot, a front right foot, a hind right foot, and a hind left. And if you can just imagine this bear is sitting back, it's perfect, and then there's this big, nice, lovely scat, which I've highlighted for you because I get excited about scat. Maybe you do too. But I love tracking for that purposes. I didn't see this bear, but the story is there, and I can imagine the bear in its track, and certainly it's leaving me great sign as well. Again, here is bear moving through grassland. It was that same bear with that in that last slide. And you can see if a human were to walk through this, it would look very, very similar. So a lot of the time, if you're out tracking and you see something that you might think is bear, just follow it out a bit, and you'll usually get to some kind of sign that's going to tell you bear or human. I've been fooled many times. So this bear, this was up in Modini Mayakama Preserve. I actually think that they've just changed the name to Modini Preserve. It's part of the Audubon Canyon Ranch complex of their preserves. And it was April, it was out. And we were trailing this bear through the grass, and the bears love to sit in water, and it was a really warm day. And this was a very fresh trail, maybe just a couple hours old. And we got to this old bathtub that had been left out probably as a cattle trough or something. And it had rained, you know, this was 2019, and we had a lot of rain in March and the beginning of April. And so there was some water in it. And my friend who I was with were like, oh, wouldn't it be funny if that bear got in the bathtub? And sure enough, the trail took us right to the bathtub. And you can see, these are kind of the hair marks. I couldn't get a better figure of it, but you can see from the tracks that the bear was sitting in the tub and then had this beautiful view of like Healdsburg and Pepperwood and Santa Rosa and the coastal mountains. Bears love water, and the bear was just sitting in the bathtub and got out and took a time. The bear, we continued to follow the bear for probably another hour, but then it hit an asphalt road and we lost it. So that was kind of exciting. So let's get into food preferences, because that's definitely part of the track and sign. Bears, for as much as they eat and need a lot of food to sustain their bulk, they don't have very great digestion. And so a lot of their scat is really easy to identify what they're eating, because it comes through looking almost as if it wasn't touched. Down here on the right is a scat with pin cherries. Pin cherries are really tasty. Up here is a scat that's almost predominantly all grass. Bears, people are always astounded. Bears are grazers in the spring. When the new shoots come up and the forbs come up, they will spend days and hours just grazing and picking. And what's really interesting is if they have the opportunity, they'll cherry pick their favorite flowers and grasses, and if the seed heads are up as well. This was the bear that I was telling you hooked a right on Santa Rosa Creek. And it was a little bit earlier than now. It was in May. And you know those kind of, they're called cherry plums because they look like big cherries. Well, as this bear was walking, and it turned out to be a juvenile dispersing, this bear must have been really hungry. And if you ever walk that trail, there's lots of those cherry plums all along that trail, but they weren't quite ripe. And I felt just tremendously for this bear, because there were hundreds of these pits, but they weren't ripe. And I don't know if you've ever eaten lots and lots of fruit, even when it is ripe, you know, it can be a little rough on your digestion. And then certainly if it's not ripe and it's sour and bitter. So this bear was leaving a lot of sign from eating all of the cherry plums. Bears also eat a lot of insects, you know, especially grubs like ant grubs, termite grubs, beetle grubs. They're really nutritious. They have a lot of fat. And so this is kind of classic sign. A bear will go into rotting logs and they'll just pull it apart. Other animals do this, but you know, bears, they don't really need to be too cautious, and they're very strong. So they will go in and they'll just rip it apart, and you'll see wood all over. Skunks will do the same, but skunks are really meticulous and they're a little bit neater. So that's a way to differentiate between bear and skunk and some other creatures that might do that. And yes, bears are scavengers and they are carnivores. They're housed under that taxonomic order of carnivora. They do eat meat. They will go after fawns that have been newly dropped, or even elk calves if it's in an appropriate situation. But they're not great hunters. Like a mountain lion is an incredible hunter. They are designed to kill their food. And they are beautiful to watch. I have such respect for mountain lions. Bears, they're a little bit opportunistic. If they can do it, they will. If they can find it, they get them. As I said, they will go after the fawns, but this was a bison calf that was killed by wolves. Again, this is in Yellowstone, and the bears push the wolves off of their kill, and we're taking advantage of that. So they do eat meat. It is not the bulk of their diet, though. So black bears and trees are deeply intertwined. Black bears are, I would say, maybe very dependent on trees and the communication that they can afford through trees. So these are aspen. We do have aspen in the Sierras, and you'll find this kind of sign all over our Sierras. But they use lots of other trees. It's just so beautifully depicted here. Almost, some people call them totem bear trees because the designs are incredible. What you're seeing here is feeding sign. There are, and I'll show you, or I might have had it already in a different slide, there are trees that bears will mark by slashing them and clawing them, and it will be very deep grooves and kind of prominent markings. What you're seeing here are just the claw marks of the bear grabbing the tree, pulling up, grabbing the tree, pulling up to get into the top of these aspen trees, where there are often new buds that they will eat, but there's also nesting birds and squirrels in there that they will go after. And they, oh, and I had forgotten to say, you know, when we were talking about animal matter that they might eat, I have seen them go after voles and ground squirrels. They will dig them up. Their sense of smell is incredible. So they can smell underground. They can dig up where their nests are. They can actually follow the scent of the trail as the vole and the gophers are moving under. They're remarkable creatures. So if you really want to understand a bear, get really familiar with your nose and your sense of smell, and really tune into your stomach, because bears are led by their stomach, and then they use their nose to fulfill their stomachs. And maybe that's why I love them so much, because I really like to eat. And my guess is that's part of the reason they really love Sonoma County. We are a foodie county, we're local, we're sustainable, often all those good, yummy things. So let me just go back. So these are bear marking trees. Or I'm sorry, I just totally misspoke. These are bear feeding sign, whereas this is bears marking trees for communication. And again, there's lots of theories about why they're doing it. Is it to find a mate? Sometimes the number of times that bears are doing this goes up in the spring when they're looking for mates in May and June, but they will mark trees all year round. So one of the things that's really exciting about the black bears coming into Sonoma County is it's a little bit like being an explorer. You know, sometimes people are like, oh, there's no more exploration left because everything's been found on our planet. But I want to just offer that this is really the first time that black bears are being studied in California and coming into this kind of high numbers. You know, we don't just have the wandering bear, we have a population of black bears here, and no one really knows what they do in Sonoma County and what are they eating and what trees are they marking. And so it's this exciting kind of exploratory time of walking into the unknown. So maybe with a lot of your questions, my answers might be, I don't know, or we don't know yet, or we're trying to discover what's going on. So this picture is, I have to just, two dear friends, Preston Taylor and Ginny Fifield, and we were out tracking, and this tree is a Sargent cypress. And one of the things we're finding in Sonoma County is that the bears really like to mark the Sargent cypress. The Sargent cypress, if you've ever hung out with them, they have this amazing smell that travels far and wide. And it has been found, in at least how I've been taught and seen in other parts of the US and California, that bears will mark trees that have a really big scent that flows out of them when they've been hit, and also that have big color differences. Like if you hit the bark and then there's red that pops, like a red cedar in the East Coast. Is it red? Not red oak. Anyway, red pine. Sorry, like had to go to my Vermont reality for a minute. And they'll mark those trees because you get a big difference in color coming up. So Preston and Ginny and I were out tracking, and we found this Sargent cypress that the bear had broken the top of the tree off. And that sign, often male bears will do that, of these young saplings. And you can also see in this picture on the bottom left where the bear had bitten the bark away. And we'll get into bear biting trees in a minute. Here is another Sargent cypress. This is in a whole different part of the Modini-Myakama Preserve. This is Stephen Hamerick from Pepperwood. He's also a colleague in the North Bay Bear Collaborative. And we were way out, and sure enough, this Sargent cypress, the top had been broken off, and the bear had been hitting this Sargent cypress over and over again. And here's an up-close version. It was newly scratched and bitten, and you can even see there's a little bit of bear hair, because the bears love to go up to the like spiky parts, and they just like rub their backs. It's like an amazing back scratcher for them. And there's lots of videos out there. As soon as you get off here, go type in like bears scratching, and hilarious videos. They really get into it. They have like good rhythm too. So this kind of idea of bear bitten trees. Bears bite trees. And the first time I learned this, I was like, what are you talking about? How do they bite them? Because, you know, wouldn't they just smash their noses? Well, it's been subsequently found through watching and through camera videos that if you can imagine, there's a tree behind me and I'm a bear, the bears back up against the tree and turn their head sideways, and they bite into the tree, and their incisors will go into the tree. They're very strong jaws, and they'll bite into the tree, and then they pull out. So what we're seeing here in this left picture, these are the incisors, and then you can see how there's a little bit of the wood being pulled out. That's that same scene. And again, here you can see incisors, and there's wood chunks pulled out. Again, an incredible form of communication. What they're saying, they haven't told me yet, but I'm hopeful. You know, I'm only 45. I might have some decades of bear communication coming to me. Oops. Another relationship that bears have with trees is they use the trees as babysitter trees. And it's just about the most cute thing you're ever going to see. So when a mama bear comes out of her den, and if it was the first year that, you know, that it was a year that she had had cubs, these cubs are really small. They're, you know, I don't even know percentage wise. They're this big. For if you're a male bear that grows to 400 pounds, you're tiny. And they're very, very vulnerable. As I started our talk off saying, larger male bears will try and kill young bears. And so what mom does, because she's so hungry and she can't afford to eat and have these little bears following behind her, so she sends them up into what are called babysitter trees. They tend to be trees with very deeply grooved bark, and have stout, thick branches and numerous branches that are high up, but not so high up that it's too hard for the little bears to get up to. And she will send the bears up the tree, and then she goes off and eats. And it's incredible because I've actually seen it happen. And what she does is she'll smack the bottom of the tree and makes this noise, and the bears go up and they hang out in these trees up there, and then she goes and feeds. And then when I don't know how she knows, but she'll come back, and then she smacks the bottom of the tree again, and down they come. And I've seen her once like hit the bottom of the tree, and then these bear cubs come down. And then she tends to nurse, and then she'll send them back up. So it is remarkable to see these trees and that relationship. You know, if you can imagine from the time you're only, you know, a couple months old throughout your whole life, but that relationship that you grow with trees. Bears also like telephone poles, and telephone poles used to be trees. You know? And it's kind of a funny thing. People are like, what do you mean telephone poles? But I really challenge you, if you know that you're in bear country, if you're like in Napa or Lake County or in the Sierras, and you find a line of telephone poles and there's bear sign around, go look at the telephone poles, because bears bite them. And a lot of telephone poles are sprayed with creosote or some other really scented kind of weatherproofing, probably toxic material. But when it's disturbed or clawed or bitten, it releases that scent just like a Sargent cypress does. And so the bears hit telephone poles over and over again. Again, we're out at Modini, Myakama Preserve, and this is my friend Lisa. And up here is a bear bite. So Lisa's about 5'5", 5'6". So this bear is a pretty big bear. It's standing on its hind legs to be able to bite this. So I don't know how big that bear, as it's standing way up and fully extended, is at least, 5'10", maybe even 6 feet tall. So you all with me? I hope you're all doing good. You can take a little break. I know that was a lot of information to take in. So I'm gonna drink a little bit of water, because den sites, bears go into dens and they rest, so we can take a minute. Nice. So den sites are individual to all of the bears. Each bear chooses its preference. There seemed to be, at least when I was working in Yellowstone, that they would choose south-facing slopes that had a certain kind of amount of cover. But I've also seen, in Southern California mountains, like the San Bernardino Mountains, that the bears will just choose den sites that are under fallen logs and things that don't really provide a lot of cover. And certainly mama bears that are about to give birth and have young ones with her, she chooses a much more protective site and is a lot more selective about them. So bears den sites vary greatly, is my understanding. But bears also make bear beds. This is a grizzly bear, because I don't have a picture of a black bear in the bed. And you can see that really this bear is just posted up and sleeping for a couple hours. And it was there for a good 6 hours before it moved on. And we went back the next day, and you can see this is the bear bed. And bear beds are very concave and circular, and they're large. And there's typically a lot of scat around them, because they'll go eat and come back to the bed and sleep, and go eat and come back again. And then they move on to wherever they're being led by their nose. So I want to talk a little bit about just bears and their ecology and how incredibly important they are. I think bears have a lot of mystique. We love the idea of teddy bears and things, but they're also this integral part of our ecology. And I'm excited that bears are coming back, because bears and salmon in the forest are deeply intertwined. This is a beautiful book called The Fish in the Forest, and it's actually about salmon, but there's an enormous part that is dedicated to bears and their relationship with salmon. So we're going to go that way now. So this is the anadromous nutrient cycle. Anadromy or anadromous means that you were born in freshwater, and as a youth you make your way out into saltwater, and depending on what species you are, you could spend anywhere from 2 to 4 years in the ocean, and then you come back into the freshwater to spawn. In Sonoma County, our coho and chinook they're both salmon species. They come back in, and when they spawn, they die. We also have another anadromous, we have 2 more anadromous species. We have the lamprey, which get no love because they're kind of ugly and people don't like them. I like them. But then we also have the steelhead, and when the steelhead come back in, they don't die when they spawn. They can spawn up to 4, 5, 6 times. So the anadromous nutrient cycle is that relationship of bears and anadromous fish species. When I moved to, as I said, to Sonoma County in 2012, and I'd grown up in Southern California, and I'd heard, I grew up in Topanga Canyon, and I heard, we have some steelhead, and I'd seen them, and they were like 2 or 3 inches long, but everyone was excited, and I was like, what's the big deal about steelhead? But then I moved up here, and I was taught by some indigenous people that I live now in a place that was known by indigenous tribes as Salmon Nation. And the salmon are totemic species that really started courting me really hard. Like everywhere I went, people were talking about salmon, and I started dreaming about them, and I was in this full blown out love affair with salmon. And it was through that relationship that I started to understand this anadromous nutrient cycle or pump. And so if you are here with us in Sonoma County, you too live in Salmon Nation. And the photos that I'm going to show you are of the kokanee salmon from Tahoe, and they come up into Taylor Creek, but I don't have photos of this happening in Sonoma County yet, but I think it's going to start to happen, and I think it's exciting. So as the salmon come back up and they start to spawn, depending on where you are, if you're in, Alaska, there can be hundreds of thousands of salmon coming back. In our county right now, our Russian River is really hurting hard. But when the salmon come back up, they're spawning, and here's a photo of eggs. A bear had pulled a mother out and opened her up and ate a lot of the eggs, but these are the eggs left over. But when they come up, as I said, they often die after they spawn, so they're really easy to catch when they're in the process of dying or spawning or have already died. And the bears are so happy. They're like, oh, thank you, salmon people. Because in Sonoma County and a lot of California, the salmon runs are coming up in fall, right before winter, and it's this enormous surge of protein and fat, which is just what they need before they go into winter hibernation, especially in the Sierras, where these photos are from. And as you can see, a lot of these fish are headless. And what will happen is there's so much abundance of these salmon coming in, the bears will just eat the heads because that brain has so much fat, and they toss the rest of the fish out. Both of these salmon are at least half a mile from the actual river system. And so what happens in this system of the anadromous nutrient pump is the bears pull the salmon out of the creek, they eat what they want, and then they drop the rest of the food. And the coyote and the osprey and the bald eagle and the fox and the skunk and whomever you can imagine come, and they carry these carcasses off into the forest to either eat them or they decompose. And all of a sudden you have these salmon nutrients from what the bears had brought out going back into the system. And one of the things that I have really learned from now over 20 years of working in conservation and ecology is if I can see an intact system, it's easier to understand how to either conserve it or maintain it or to help restore it. And so being at this Taylor Creek and really seeing this anadromous nutrient pump in action helped me to envision what we could have here in Sonoma County with the work of people like Sonoma Land Trust and Pepperwood and the Bears and all of these kind of concerted efforts in the Coho Recovery Project. Because along the creek, there were multiple bear beds, there was scat all over, there was tons of bear sign. And the other thing that's really important about this anadromous nutrient pump and cycle is the scat. So that kind of question, does a bear shit in the woods? Well, yes, they do. And they shit a lot. Sorry for my language. And they go far and wide. Bears have enormous ranges. And one of the things that was found from that book that I had shared, The Fish in the Forest, is that the forest trees have become, I wouldn't say dependent because I don't know if they're dependent, but they've certainly grown over millennia in relationship with these salmon nutrients that are dispersed by bears. In that book, The Fish in the Forest, they were coring trees in Idaho and they found marine isotopes in the trunks of the trees. Idaho is a long way from the ocean. So that anadromous nutrient pump becomes really important to the soil and the fertility of our forests. And we don't know what that means if you lose the bears from the system, and certainly, as we have here in Sonoma County, if you lose the fish from the system. So this is kind of an emerging challenge that we're looking at, and there are a lot of people working on how do we replenish these nutrients into the soil. And I don't think it's fully coincidental that as our salmon populations are growing slowly, our bear populations are growing, and we're working really diligently in Sonoma County to start to build intact ecosystems. And as you know, we're all connected. So that's kind of bear ecology and track and sign. But I would feel remiss if I didn't really go deeply into the relationship that bears and humans have. I've had the great fortune in my life to work with and live with indigenous cultures all around this world, and certainly indigenous tribes in California and in other places in the US and Mexico and Brazil. And I'll give you a minute to read this quote. And, just to highlight, the relationship between bears and humans was one of mutual respect, but it went well beyond that. And so I just want to offer that if you have ancestors from the Northern Hemisphere, probably somewhere deep in your ancestry and your legacy, there were relatives of yours that were in relationship with bears in a way that we kind of don't remember anymore. An incredible book, and I've read it so many times. I don't know if you can see it. It's called The Sacred Paw by Paul Shepard, and there's a bit by Gary Snyder in the book. But it goes really deeply into this relationship and the legacy of humans and bears and how ubiquitous it was across the Northern Hemisphere. One of the things he talks about is one of the oldest oral stories passed down. It's the bear mother story, and it's over 35,000 years old. They've traced it that far back. So that relationship of bears was not unique to California, and certainly, to the United States, what we now call the United States. It was all around. And as you start to research bears, which I hope you will go and do after, you really find out that a lot of the medicines and the foods that we eat now were taught to us by bears and certainly animals. And so here's a picture of a bear deep digging roots. And over here is a young Yurok woman digging osha root. And osha root is also a common name called bear root. And it's amazing for bringing up things from your lungs and to expire things. And in this time of illness and COVID and pandemic, when we're really being asked to go deeply into where we live and to recognize our homes and our backyards, it bears the fruit. Like, bears the fruit. What do we pay attention to? What are the animals teaching us right now? How do we learn to survive with the things that are local around us? And I just find it such a fascinating moment where we're in a global experience, yet we're being asked to be hyper-local. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from the animals and certainly allow them some space to thrive. This idea also beyond where our food and our medicines come from, if you start to go into the language of our English language, many of our words come from the word bear. So you have barren, forebears, bear a thought, bear a burden, and then we have our biggest constellation, Arcturus. That sound comes from the sound that bears made. And so again, that book, The Sacred Paw, if you look into words that make that sound bear, that it all has its legacy going back into our relationship with bears and our deep honoring of them. Which brings us to this idea of bear dances and initiations and ceremonies. And I just love this. I think it's from the 1800s. It's a English artist, and again, bears in the British Isles and Ireland and all of that were at one time prolific, and there's lots of stories of bears dancing and celebrating. And that wasn't just in the British Isles, it was all over North America. I grew up in Chumash territory. One of my teachers was a Chumash medicine woman, Cecilia Garcia, and I have been invited to the Chumash bear dances. It's an exceptional moment if you're ever able to go to a bear dance. So in essence, bears almost all around the Northern Hemisphere were believed to be healers. They also symbolized rebirth because they would go into the den in the winter and then emerge. And not only did they emerge in the winter, in the spring, they emerged with new life. They came out with cubs, right? In this time of cold and dark and death. So bears were seen as healers of land and also humans. This middle photo is a Haida bear mask, and again, worn during the bear dances for healing. And to our right, this is Inuit, which is all across the Arctic from east to west in Canada. And this specifically was a polar bear, but again, bears dancing and dancing for joy and for celebration. This is the Ainu culture in Japan. The Ainu had a deep relationship. This was the indigenous culture in Japan, had a deep relationship in bear ceremony of worshiping and to honor bears and all that they brought and all the healing that they would bring to the village and to hunters. One appointed, often what we would call a bear medicine person, would go and have to find the bear in the snow, and they would find these bears in the snow because steam vents would come out and that we knew that there were bears under there. And bears, they don't do a traditional hibernation the way that like a groundhog does. Like a groundhog and chipmunks, when they hibernate, they're out, and it takes them a while for the metabolism to come back up and for them to respond. Like you could take one of those squirrels and swing it by its tail and it wouldn't wake up. Maybe, I haven't tried it, but bears, they go into something called torpor, and so they don't go into deep hibernation, and they wake up instantly, their metabolism is running, and they are fierce, and they don't really want to be disturbed. So to be one of these bear medicine people who was sent out to kill a bear to honor it and bring it back for the celebration as an honored guest, they would have to go and wake that bear up. And that bear often came out storming, and sometimes the bear hunter at that time came back, and sometimes he didn't. That was part of the sacrifice of the village in those moments. And here you can see the bear as the honored guest. And again, they would often feed the bear and worship the bear. Again, Korea is another example. There's dozens and dozens and dozens of examples of ancient bear worship. And again, this is an example of that bear mother story. I don't even know if it's a story of bear mother culture. And it was the bear mother who actually birthed all of humanity. And this is from Korea, as it says. So that was the kind of older relationship that people have with bears, although those bear dances and ceremonies are still going on. But we're going to take kind of, okay, what is the relationship with bears right now in Sonoma County, and how do we build bear culture again? There's a slide later on where I'm about to say what I'm going to say now, but Breck Parkman, who has retired in the last 2 years, he was the California State archaeologist, and he is part of the North Bay Bear Collaborative. And his question as we started this collaborative is, how do we build bear culture in Sonoma County? How do we help people to remember that they live with bears? And when I say or think about remember, I'm talking about if you did RE-member, how do we bring that back together? Because it's deep in our ancestry. And how do we just piece it and make it whole again? Piece it together and make it whole again. So this is the North Bay Bear Collaborative, of which I was just speaking. And our mission really is to, again, like I said, build that bear culture. And here are the different people that are collaborating. We have regional parks and state parks and fish and wildlife and the Kashaya and Sonoma Land Trust. And what I love too is Recology has just joined our collaborative. Recology is waste management in all of Sonoma County with the exception of Santa Rosa. And they are so proactive and willing to help us by changing routes and things. And we'll get into trash in a little bit. And then we're also working with a lot of individual landowners to really help them learn how to build a relationship with bears. And to build that relationship, we are working on lots of different projects. We're working on how to help landowners, kind of protect their private individual property. We're doing a lot of outreach, like these talks. We were doing them in person, but now because of COVID, it's a lot through webinars, which is incredible because we can reach a lot more people this way. And then we're also this summer starting a bear DNA scat and hair project. And so we will be out there collecting scat and hair and sending it off to Dr. Ben Sachs at UC Davis, and he will analyze it and help us to understand kind of how many bears that we have, but also the relationship of bears. And what I want to do is to kind of start a family tree of the bears that are in California, or well, wouldn't it be great if I could do it in all of California, but Sonoma County, and kind of get this genealogy. Like I said, my mentors, Dr. Halfpenny, he has that for the wolves in Yellowstone, and he's got all the genealogy of the wolf packs there. So I'm hoping that we can start getting that going here in Sonoma County. So here's that quote that I was talking about from Breck Parkman. And now let's talk about bears in your neighborhood and what do you do? Because they're funny and they're charismatic and everyone's like, oh, we love bears. But bears, on your porch, they're not always welcome, right? And they shouldn't always be welcome. I like these photos. They got sent to me with the question of like, this is my water barrel and I I fill it up for my dog to drink from, but inevitably I come back and it's half gone, and I don't think it's from evaporation. And so one day the woman came out, and sure enough, this bear was sitting in, it was a really hot day, and the bear was sitting in the wine barrel, and I just thought that was hilarious. So they come in and they will use your water, they will go into your pools, and if you have food, they will find it. They're really, really smart. Oops. So California Department of Fish and Wildlife, if a bear is around you and you call them and you say, I feel threatened, or it has destroyed some property, inadvertently you may start a chain of reactions that could end with that bear being killed. Whether or not that was your intention, there are these things and stipulations that the department has to follow through with. So part of what the Bear Collaborative is hopeful for is that instead of calling Fish and Wildlife, that eventually we're going to have the resources to move forward and to help you know how to become a detriment to your bear, or not a detriment, but to become the nuisance to the bear so it doesn't want to be there, rather than the bear coming towards you. We're a nascent collaboration. I don't think we're even a year old, so a lot of our work is still being designed and uncovered, but we're getting there. And here are kind of the 3 different types that the California Fish and Wildlife will determine your bear to be. So there's a no harm, no foul bear, and it can be relocated. Often when bears are relocated, they get a tag in their ear. Then there's the habituated bear. Those are bears that are no longer afraid of humans, and they're coming close, and they're often, whatever the corrective measures of relocation or hazing, it hasn't worked. If a bear gets 2 tags in its ear, it's basically like 3 strikes and you're out. The next time that bear is caught, it will be killed. And then you could be, without going through 1 and 2, you could immediately become a bear that has a depredation permit taken out on it. If I was to call and say, look, this bear just got into my garden and destroyed my fence, and now it's, I feel unsafe, or it's in my orchard, California Fish and Wildlife can bring out the wardens and animal services and have that bear killed. So there are these laws that are put into order, and you can go to the department's website and it will spell it all out for you there if you want more information. But the best way to just get over the bears, or to not allow them into your space, is to not let them associate you with food. They're incredibly smart. They have amazing memories. It's been shown over and over that mother bears will teach their cubs where good food is. And so the best strategy is to not let the bears know that you have food at all. So you really want to keep like your trash in bear-proof containers. And we're actually going to go through these things right now.
Hey, Megan.
Yeah.
I just want to give you a 15-minute time check.
Oh, thank you. Great. That's perfect.
Okay, great.
So as I said, waste management becomes, your number 1 most effective thing. Don't leave your trash out. There are lots and lots of bear-proof containers. We're working with Recology that's putting up bear-proof like dumpsters. They're changing their routes so people don't have to leave their trash out overnight. And there is a website, bearsmart.org, which is by far the best website that I've found with all of these mitigation strategies. So check it out. When I was working in Vermont, and I was working on a habitat connectivity project, but I was also asked to start giving bear town hall meetings. So in Vermont, let's say starting late February, early March, there would be these town hall meetings where people would come together and say, first bear was spotted, and it's time to start bringing in your bird feeders, and how is your trash, and what are you going to do? And it was to help really take care of the bears and the people. Bears look at these pictures. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. They're incredible. Keeping food in your car. I had a friend in Tahoe. She lives in Tahoe. She had half a granola bar, and the bear must have opened the door, but then you could see that there were like cub tracks, and she must have sent her cubs into the truck to find that little granola bar. And I always feel for this bear, because I think what happened when I was reading the story of this photo, I pulled it off the web, is that the person saw the bear in their car and shut the door. And then the bear was stuck in the car, and it's like, how do I get out of here? This is classic. People are like, oh, I'm just going to keep food outdoors for my cat. And it is a horrible thing to do for wildlife. They become habituated. They become, um, you know, yeah, they just become habituated. They become accustomed to the food, and they will continue to visit, and they will push the edges of those boundaries, and not be very respectful. It's harmful for your pets, it's harmful for you, and certainly harmful for the bears. There's an area, God, I can't remember what state it was in the Midwest, and the hunters were feeding bears donuts because the bears really like the donuts, and they were using them as a bait and attractant. And it turned out biologists started studying the bears, and there was this whole population of bears from this area that had diabetes. So bears are not meant to eat pet food or donuts and corn or things like that. Keeping them in the wild is really our best bet. Things like cleaning your grill, again, this kind of idea of smell. They can smell things from miles away. So it doesn't mean you don't, you can't barbecue. It just means clean your grill after, which is probably good for the ants and all kinds of things. Again, back to this idea, or back to this website, go check it out. They have schematics for how to build bear-proof compost. The one on the right is very elaborate and gorgeous, and you don't need to go that elaborate. But as I said, Sonoma County, we have vineyards, we have orchards, we have apiaries, we have all kinds of incredible food sources here because we are an agricultural county, and the bears will enjoy that if we do not set up deterrents ahead of time. So there are these kind of deterrents. Bear spray. This is if you really have a nuisance bear. When I work in black bear country, I don't carry black bear spray. When I'm in grizzly country, I do. It's like uber strong pepper spray. It has been shown over and over to be effective. So you can get it online. But most of the people that I've seen hurt by it are people within a building, like someone has their bear spray and they drop it and it goes off in the building, and humans have been much more affected by it than I've seen bears be. Also, there's these ideas of a board with nails, and if you see that the bear is always hitting your fence line in one area or coming up to your house in one area, you can put that there. As you saw, that their feet are bare and they don't like to walk on sharp things. It's unpleasant. So that's another strategy that they're using in places like Tahoe and Yosemite. And our goal is to not become like Tahoe or Yosemite as far as bear nuisance. We want to mitigate it and be really proactive about it. Electric fences are also have been shown to be really a good detractant for bears. You can see around the apiaries, around chickens, the bears will go, they'll test the fences. They don't like the feeling. Their noses are extraordinarily sensitive, as are their feet and hands. The one thing that I didn't put is dogs are also really effective for bears, guard dogs. So here is a picture of Sonoma County in our landscape. It's a little bit old, this map, but why I put it up here is to just demonstrate that by far most of Sonoma County is privately owned. There are conservation easements, there are land that are put into protection, but about 85 to 95%, depending on who you speak to, is privately owned. And then with this, coupled with this slide, that's from the California Department of Finance, if we're projected to have a 64% population growth by 2040, that means a lot of interaction between our wild spaces and our human spaces. And what we're seeing in other places, not yet Sonoma County, thankfully, is this interaction is really like negative and detrimental for the bears. And so our work with all of those collaborating partners that you saw, and also folks like you and volunteers, is to really kind of bring this to the highlight, not allow this to happen, and just really to welcome the bears in a good way, to stay in the wild spaces, to do good land stewardship there, and have a bear culture that's both beneficial for humans and bears simultaneously. And so with that, I just want to say thank you. I appreciate you going for the long ride and listening to me talk probably way too much, but thanks, and I guess it's question time now.
Great, thank you so much, Megan. That was fantastic. We do have quite a few questions, and some of them, what I'm going to try to do is compile them because some of them are a little bit, they overlap a little bit. But I think one that I want to ask right off the bat, and I think it's on a lot of people's minds, especially those who are living in Sonoma County, is what is the estimated population of black bears in this county? And maybe if you could kind of compare it to neighboring counties or the Sierras or.
Right. So that's a great question to all of you who answered that, and I'm going to have a frustrating answer. The short answer is we don't know yet because, as I was saying, black bears in the North Bay area, so these kind of Marin, Sonoma, Napa, Lake counties have not really been studied. So that DNA collection project that I was talking about that we're starting this summer in partnership with California Fish and Wildlife is to answer that specific question so we can start to get some population estimates. But if you look at Mendocino County and Humboldt County, which are very, very high densities, I think the estimate is 3 bears per acre, which is very, very high. And we are not anywhere near that density at all. And our work is to make sure that even if the bear populations are increasing, that we have really healthy habitat and connected habitat so that they're able to move and not really even need to come into our human neighborhoods and kind of not be distressed to come in. So sorry, I don't have a better answer for you, but we're working on it.
Yeah, great, thank you. Another question is, what do we know about how black bears and mountain lions share habitat territory in Sonoma County? And then they ask a little bit about how those different habitats can overlap with one another.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I wish, Quentin Martins or Ginny Fifield, who are amazing mountain lion experts, were here to speak with me. But I will tell you what I know, and then I would encourage you to go and speak with some other folk. So both mountain lions and black bears are these big kind of charismatic carnivores. As I said, the mountain lions are these tremendous predators, and they're hunting regularly for the survival, certainly of themselves. But if you're a mama cougar or mountain lion, you are also feeding your young. And their territories in other places, like when I've been working in Colorado, black bears and cougar territory overlaps, and that is pretty much the norm. What has been seen, and it seems to become kind of like the norm, and we don't know if this was happening hundreds of years ago or if this is a new phenomena, is that black bears will often push mountain lions off of their kills and scavenge those kills. So there's a question right now, is this a newer phenomena because of the decrease of food availability from poor stewardship and fire suppression and kind of a simplification of our ecosystems, and so bears are now becoming a little bit more pushy and aggressive because they are weightier and stronger. I don't know if stronger is the right word, but they're certainly more forceful than a mountain lion. Or has this been going on, forever in their relationship, and we're just seeing more of it now because we're catching it on cameras? So that's kind of the question that we don't know. I think it was suggested, or the question is out there, it was thought a lot that possibly, it was kind of considered that mountain lions were the apex predator, but now that we're seeing this behavior of bears pushing mountain lions off their kill, the question is, well, are bears the apex predator then? And I'm not a predator expert by any stretch of the imagination, and certainly I would want to dig deeper into what does that really mean, apex predator. I think there's, it's a slippery slope when we start to put species into boxes because we don't fully understand what's going on out there.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to compile a few questions here, and this is a big one.
Okay.
But I think that it's on a lot of people's minds, and when you talk about bears, I think one of the first thing that comes to mind is safety and how to be safe in and around bear country and around bears. And you did touch on this during your presentation, but there are some more specific questions in here about hiking in bear country, both in grizzly and black bear country, and more so around what's the best way to avoid an encounter. And there's some questions about bear bells and bear spray is mentioned in here. talking loudly, things like that. And then the second half, so there's the first half, which is hiking in bear country. And then there's a few questions about like garden spaces next to people's homes and whether or not bears will and can push their way through like a mosquito net that's covering a door, or so kind of more the developed area bear safety.
Okay, so great. Those are excellent questions, and I'm so glad that you are all asking that. So let's start with the hiking piece, or just basically living in bear country. I would say I've had dozens and dozens of black bear encounters, and all but one that I can think of, the bears immediately saw me, or we bumped into each other, not literally, but within a couple feet, and I freeze and they freeze and then they take off, and I'm just like, whoa, did that really happen? So that is by far my experience, and many, many others. You know, again, Dr. Halfpenny talks about that essentially bears are scaredy cats. They don't really want to interact with us. They're scared. Humans have hunted them, and animals are pretty savvy. They know that humans are dangerous, and they smell us often way before we're going to even get close to them. When those kind of encounters change is when wind shifts and they're no longer smelling us. So that's first and foremost. They're not out there, the black bears are not out there hunting us. With black bears, when you're walking with them in black bear territory, and you see one and it feels like it might not be running away or backing down, or it's curious. And often the other thing that happens is they'll run and then they get curious and they'll turn and look back. And that's totally normal. And then they'll figure out what you are and they'll keep going. But if there is one that you're feeling like is going to, for some reason, is dangerous, you get really big with black bears and you fight. And a black bear, I have never been attacked by a black bear. I've never even really felt threatened by a black bear. So this is what I have been taught to do. And you fight and you punch and you really do everything that you can to get that black bear off. Black bears will often do something called bluff charging, where they'll come at you and go and huff at you. I have had black bears huff at me, but they stop short and usually turn away. Also, just if you see a bear, and you can be respectful, and if it feels like it's going to have kind of a contentious relationship, just walk away. And they're typically not going to follow you. And there's lots of communication that you can learn. They clack their teeth, they huff, body posture, all of that is just a lot of communication. And it's up to us, I feel, to learn bear communication. They have learned us, they understand us, I think, far better than we understand them. If you're in grizzly country, it's a whole other story. I do carry bear spray in grizzly country. Again, I have never had a negative encounter, and I've tracked them before, but they're a little bit more cantankerous. They're a little more grumpy. They grew up in an ecology and evolved in an ecology that was wide open spaces. They didn't have trees to retreat to, so their defense mechanism was to stand their ground and fight. They are big, they have long claws, and that's how they kind of deal with that encounter. So I've been told. And if for some reason you find yourself being attacked by a grizzly, you don't fight with grizzlies. You cover the back of your neck and your head, and you go into fetal position and you lay quietly until that bear has decided to back off. And I don't know, Kyle, you've worked in both black bear and grizzly country. Would you add anything, or?
No, I think you covered it. I think the thing is with grizzly bears, when they attack you, if they attack you, it's usually a defensive, and it's because they don't want you in their area. So it's not with the intention to eat you, right. And so that's why you don't fight back, because you're just showing them that you're not a threat, and hopefully they will just rough you up a little bit and then leave you alone.
Exactly. Great. Thank you. Okay, and so then to the second question, that interface of wild and urban, and what is that relationship, and what will bears do? Yes, I mean, I have to be totally candid and honest. If bears are habituated because we as humans haven't done our jobs with deterring them and hazing them, they will come into garden spaces. They will come into houses if doors are open. The frequency of that happening is very, very low. Lots of places, depending on where you live, like places in Tahoe have a high relationship with that. Yosemite, you've heard. But those places didn't really mitigate the bear nuisance problems early enough. Yosemite used to feed their bears in the campgrounds and in the dumpsters. And so, as I said, bears transmit information generationally, and you get these cultures of bears that are intensely habituated. And that's what we're seeing in places like that. Our goal in Sonoma County is to never let that happen. We're really interested in bears staying in the wild open spaces. And you really just, if you see a bear that is, even if it's not doing anything, but it's coming close and it's like checking out your yard, go get big pots and pans and be loud. Throwing things at bears is not inappropriate. Bears are really strong. You're not going to hurt the bear. In Yellowstone, which has a much better track record with their bear behavior than Yosemite, they haze the bears and the wolves by shooting rubber bullets at them and noisemakers. That is completely appropriate and actually is much better for the bears and certainly for you and your own safety.
Great, thanks. And I'm going to piggyback that last comment with somebody asked how to protect black bears, and I think that you just commented on probably the best way that we can protect them. But do you have any other comments about how we can help protect?
I think a lot of education is really important, and helping people not to be afraid. Bears are these incredible creatures, and there are many, many places that live very closely with bears and have incredible relationships with them. And there are lots of stories of, if you talk to Breck Parkman, who works a lot with Pomo and Coast Miwok and Wapo, there's stories where the old grandmothers would go out into grizzly country and they would just talk to the bears, and they would have this relationship. And while I'm not saying that we need to go all that way, but I think helping to decrease fear is really important. And the other thing that I'm really, really interested in is stewardship of healthy, connected habitat. It's really important that we continue in Sonoma County to have large tracts of permeable, connected habitat that is diverse and has food enough for the bears to eat. And so part of our long-term vision for the North Bay Bear Collaborative is to have good stewardship with volunteers helping us to make sure that there's a diversity of food for the bears in the wild spaces. There's a myriad of ways to tend our landscapes, but it helps us to build relationship with the land, with the bears, and to keep the bears safe as well.
Great, thank you. Now back to more ecology questions. Someone was wondering kind of the lifespan and range of a typical black bear.
Do they mean like range of where they move, like their home range?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the lifespan, I'm terrible with numbers. I think it's somewhere around 7 to 10 years in the wild. But I think in captivity, it can be up to 20 years, is pretty much, and as short as 5 years in the wild. Their home ranges is wildly dependent on where they live. And what food is available. In some areas, like in California, pre-colonization, the bears, it seems, had a bounty of food and probably didn't need to range as far. And there's lots of records of when settlers first started to come in, that they would walk out and they would see, 5 to 7 bears in the big grasslands digging up tubers and things. So it seemed like it was a pretty dense bear populations. And then there's places in like Arizona where the home ranges are huge because they're having to go really far distances from, the conifer forests at the right time of year and down into the deserts when they're blooming and following the fawns and elk and such. So it's a tough question to answer. And we're just starting to get a handle, also again, this project that we're working on to figure out what the home range size is in the North Bay.
Great, thank you. Here's another similar range question. Some folks are wondering where there have been bear sightings in Sonoma County.
Mm.
There's a question about Annandale State Park, and then there's a question about a juvenile that was spotted on Sonoma Mountain recently.
Yeah.
And if you
Oh,
know,
that juvenile. Yes.
yeah,
We've been tracking him, and we're pretty aware of that pair. So let me just start with the first part of that question. Where pretty much are bears residing regularly and possibly over year, or spending the whole year in that spot. So there are bears in kind of like the Annapolis, Wallala, northwestern denser forests up there. It doesn't seem that they're very, very dense there because there's not, doesn't seem to be ideal habitat for them, but there is a population of bears up there. There may be 1 to 2 bears kind of in the Willow Creek area. We get these kind of sightings once or twice a year, or I'll find bear scat, so probably very low in that area. The biggest bear hotspots in Sonoma County and kind of contiguous habitat seems to be kind of the northern end of the Mayacamas and on the western side, so Pepperwood, West Springs Watershed, Modini Mayakama Preserve, and then as that bleeds over, it goes over into Robert Louis Stevenson, Angwin. We're working with Land Trust of Napa County, and they have a really high bear density in some of their preserves, which go from Angwin all the way up to Robert Louis Stevenson. It's 17,000 contiguous acres, and there seems to be a pretty heavy bear density there. Bote Park, which if you were to come down the eastern side of the Mayacamas and we're in Napa County, there's bears there. Seasonally, following like apples, and then there's land that's contiguous with Sugarloaf and Hood Mountain from there, and we do have bears there. It's not nearly as high as kind of in the northern end of the range. As far as the Annandale question goes, we believe that there's no residing bears there, that it was a juvenile dispersing through. And similarly, like with Sonoma Mountain bear. And what happens is May, June, July, mama's like, all right, time to get. And these juvenile bears are like, oh God, what do I do? And they're following their noses and they're just wandering, basically. And they often will follow the watersheds down in these kind of riparian corridors, and find themselves, in downtown Santa Rosa. And they're like, oh shit, how do I get out of here? And they keep going.
great, thank you. Then I think we have one more, and I think that this would be helpful for everybody, and it's really just a recommendation if you have any books that you could recommend to folks to look up. You provided some websites and some resources.
Yeah.
But if you know any.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, there's the cultural aspect of which I shared, the Sacred Paw, the Fish in the Forest, which is, I'm sorry to drop off, but this book right here, it's called Giving Voice to Bear. This is a really, really beautiful book. And it goes in certainly into a little bit of the ecology, but relationships of North America with bears. There's a book, if you're looking, the book that is most closely matched with our bears and bear behavior, it's like Black Bears of Washington, and it's very dry. It's a reference book. It's filled with all kinds of charts of like, this is the size of tracks and things like that. But that would be kind of the closest. There's a great book called Animal Behavior of North American Mammals, and there's a beautiful section in there of bears and bear behavior, and the author shows, I think the author is Mark Elbrock, and there's a second author I'm blanking on right now, and he shows positioning of heads and sounds and ears and things like that. That's a great book. That's be where I'd start.
Okay, great. All right, well, that is all the time we have for the Q&A. So thank you all for your questions. I hope we were able to answer most of them. And a big, big thank you to Meghan for taking the time to talk with us tonight. And thank you all for joining us. I want to invite you to continue to stay engaged with Sonoma Land Trust through our social media, or by signing up for our email lists, and by visiting our website. Also, please stay tuned for more presentations like this one coming in the weeks and months ahead. And finally, Sonoma Land Trust is a nonprofit organization, which means that we rely on the support of individuals like yourselves, businesses, foundations to make our work possible. If you liked what you saw tonight, please consider making a donation. Any amount helps in our effort to link large-scale habitats that keep wildlife wild and ensures that they have the space to thrive. We're going to leave you tonight with a short 4-minute video produced by Sonoma Land Trust's very own Corby Hines entitled Bears in Sonoma County. Thank you again for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you, Megan.
For over 40 years, Sonoma Land Trust and our partners have been working to protect large blocks of high-quality connected habitat. This work, along with restoration efforts aimed at promoting biodiversity, has sought to make Sonoma County a place where wildlife can thrive. No animal exemplifies wild lands more than the bear. Many residents of Sonoma County would be surprised to learn that they share a habitat with bears. But the increase in sightings and images captured on remote cameras prove that bears do indeed live here, and their numbers are likely on the rise. These are black bears, the only bear species currently in California. Grizzly bears were extirpated from the state in 1908 and can now only be found on our state flag. From protecting a critical wildlife corridor across Sonoma Valley to protecting and expanding key large-scale habitats like Bear Canyon Wildlands Preserve, the once rarely seen black bear is finding quality habitat here in Sonoma County. These images were captured on Sonoma Land Trust's aptly named Bear Canyon Wildlands Preserve. Adjacent to Bear Canyon Wildlands is Audubon Canyon Ranch's Modini Preserve, where these images were captured. The restoration efforts of our friends at Pepperwood Preserve are also bearing fruit. Bears are an important part of our ecosystem. They distribute seeds. They help the soil with their digging. They contribute marine nutrients to the uplands from eating salmon. Bears also eat a great deal of vegetation, reducing wildfire danger. Bears commonly consume ants, grubs, and other insects in summer, but prefer nut crops, especially acorns and manzanita berries in the fall. As omnivores, bears will eat whatever seems edible. Mostly they're plant eaters, but they have been reported catching and consuming young deer fawns. The cubs follow their mother, learning from everything she does, including how and where to find food, and what is dangerous and to be avoided. Some cubs remain with the sow for up to 2 years before they become independent and drift away. When these young bears set off on their own to seek out new territory is when they are more likely to run into people. The increasing numbers of black bears could create conflict with humans, but it needn't be that way. People and bears have lived together on this land for millennia, and there is much that we can learn about how to revive a local bear culture. Some things people can do now to promote healthy bear behavior is to keep garbage and potential food sources where bears can't get them. Keep pet food inside. Protect beehives, goats, and chickens with electric fence. As interesting as it is to see a bear by your house, scare them away. If you are interested in learning more about local bears, check out the North Bay Bear Collaborative website. And special thanks to our friends at Pepperwood Preserve and Audubon Canyon Ranch for protecting habitat and providing their bear footage.